John Wayne Gacy, um, born March 17th, 1942, American serial killer and sex offender known as the Killer Clown, who was convicted of killing 33 young men and boys in the Chicago area in the 1970s. He was executed
Mm.
by lethal injection on May 10th, 1994, at the Stateville Correctional Center. So just like Ridgway, his case is still ongoing, but Ridgway's still alive. He didn't get the death penalty, but
Yeah.
there are things that are connecting um,
Mm.
Gacy to current. Because I think there was like 9 unidentified as soon as they found him. They couldn't identify him. But
Yeah.
here's a quick timeline within the last decade. In October 12th, 2011, um, the Cook County Sheriff's Department announces that it's undertaking a new effort to identify the remains of 8 Gacy victims, whose names
Mm.
still are not known. The agency says DNA testing that wasn't available when the remains were found in 1978 could help. So on November
Yeah.
29th, 2011, the county identifies one of the victims as a William George Bundy, a 19-year-old construction worker from Chicago. 2000 July 19th, 2017, county identifies a 16-year-old James Jimmy Byron Hakinson as another Gacy's victims. The teenager he had left in Minnesota. He had left his Minnesota home in 1976 and was last heard from in August of that year. So he's been missing since
Mm.
1976.
Wow.
October 25th, and this is just a couple months ago, 2021, authorities identify another victim as Francis Wayne Alexander, a
Oh
North
my
Carolina
gosh.
native who moved with his family to New York State as a child and then moved to Chicago not long before he vanished. That leaves the names of 5 victims still unknown. So,
Wow.
God bless the modern advancements in DNA testing to give some of those families some kind
Absolutely.
of answers and closure. So, it's just
Yeah.
so sad that
Yeah.
these are still being solved to this day. Ugh, disturbing. So,
And just all these families that have been
ruined
destroyed,
lives.
forever and ever.
And I forgot before we even went into this video, I want to dedicate this whole entire video to all the victims of these families. So
Yes.
this video is
Yes.
for you to shed light on anything that it might shed light on. So you don't
Right.
always get a perspective like this in the mainstream. You get a therapist, an anecdote. You get this, that. We're trying to look and shed some spiritual light on it. So
Yeah.
um, John Wayne Gacy Senior he was born 1900 to 1969, was a alcoholic and beat him frequently during his violent rages. As
Oh
Gacy
my.
grew up, see another pattern there. As Gacy
Yeah.
grew up, he began to develop an identity crisis, doubting his own masculinity. I think that's very known. We all know about that.
Yeah.
At the age
Yeah.
of 11, he suffered a blow to the head from a swing that is from his dad. Over the next 5 years, he had frequent blackouts until doctors found a clot in his brain that was removed with medications. Following that, he would feign
Ah.
heart problems for attention. So not
So
only
he had
he,
a head injury.
Mhm.
Oh my
Yeah, and it
gosh.
developed him into kind of a hypochondriac, if you will, because he would feign heart problems for attention.
Right. Right.
His dad made him feel unmasculine, and that
Mm.
I think that would play a role into his homosexuality,
Yeah.
right? After
Well, of
attending,
course, some people want to say you're born this way, but
yeah, I think we made an episode on that. After attending 4 schools in his senior year and never graduating, Gacy dropped out of school and left home for Las Vegas. While in Vegas, he worked part time as a janitor in a funeral parlor, performing odd jobs. Do you think maybe him working in a funeral parlor had an effect on him? Do you
oh
think?
boy.
I'm
Yeah,
just I'm wondering.
absolutely.
So yeah, he's around. I mean, is he around dead bodies? Is he
I'm
maybe?
sure he was.
Yeah. Soon after Gacy returned home to Chicago from Las Vegas in the early 1960s, he enrolled himself into a business college and eventually graduated. While at business college, he perfected his talent in salesmanship. Gacy was a born salesman who could talk his way in and out of almost anything. He had an IQ
Mm.
of 118, signifying near superior intelligence.
Whoa.
Which I find interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting to
Hmm.
find out the other people's IQ, except for Ridgway. We know he had a low
Yeah, I
IQ.
think Ramirez is very fairly average, but yeah,
Mm.
Gacy was a highly intelligent. 118.
Wow.
In the spring of 1968, Gacy was inducted by a grand jury in the Blackhawk County for allegedly committing the act of sodomy. We all know that one.
Yeah.
With a teenage boy named Mark Miller. This was his first known crime. Um,
Mm.
but, he kind of moves out. He puts that behind him. He ends up doing, I think, 18 months out of a 10-year sentence. He's released on good behavior. He's the ideal inmate. Um, you know, the Democratic Party headquarters nominates him to the Town Street Lighting Commission in 1975. Unaware
And
of.
Ted worked for the Republican Party,
Really?
so they're trying to get in politics too.
I mean, it boggles my
They'd fit right
mind.
in today. They'd fit right in today with
Search.
how our politicians are killing us. But okay.
Isn't it just very intriguing? And I think that's why these serial killers are so popular, and the movies, and we've kind of had a culture, pop culture around them, is the fact that they do these wicked acts, but they're very
Normal in some
goal
ways.
oriented. They
And
accomplish
then
some stuff.
yeah,
That's kind of
yeah, and
interesting.
and they have that dual life because wasn't Gacy married as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so they're unaware of his prior conviction in Chicago. I mean,
Yeah.
he has a picture with Rosalind Carter, at the private reception
I've
in
seen
Chicago
that.
after the Polish Constitution Day Parade on May 6, 1978. At the Chicago, you can find that in the Chicago Tribune archives.
Wow.
He's esteemed in his community. Next to the president, the first lady. Yeah, that's very
That's
interesting. So before
wow.
his execution, Gacy claimed that he was the victim of multiple personality disorder, and that
Hmm.
his atrocities were actually the work of an evil alter ego named Jack. Do you ever read about the alter ego that he talked about?
I think I did, and he would also be dressed up as Pogo the clown, right? When he killed his victims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing. I found this a couple days ago. There's a psychiatrist named Helen Morrison. She, she has Gacy's brain in her basement. I mean, you can go to the
Why?
Go to the Chicago Tribune. It's kind of interesting.
Is she studying it or making out with it?
She's studying it. It's in a safe place because I guess that was his dying wish to have her study his brain because
Okay, I think I remember hearing that. Okay.
yeah, I don't think we have any
Well, what did
much.
she find out about it?
They didn't really say much about it.
Ew, that's just
Yeah, she
creepy.
has it at her house, and she says it's in a very safe place. You can't just burglarize and come in. It's well protected. But she literally has his brain in her basement. I would feel some type of way if that was at my house, but
There's got to be a demonic spirit on that brain,
so
right?
Gacy,
Oh my gosh.
he insists that he never confessed to the murders. Okay.
What?
If you watch the interviews after, probably what, 10, 12 years later, and he's having these interviews, he's just he has written an account of his trial called A Question of Doubt. So he wrote something. You ever read that? Which he has privately
I
published. He
yeah.
privately published it. In it, he says that there are two sides to every story. He describes himself as the 34th victim.
Oh Lord.
I know. After he finished A Question of Doubt, he wrote a manuscript called A Questionable Case and Conviction, which contains his answers to 147 questions. Toward the beginning of the manuscript, he writes, so in his own words, the following is some of the many unanswered questions with answers as factually as I know them. But first, to be fair, I will give you the state's version of the case, which is mostly their theories. According to the state, over a six-period 1972 to 1978, John Wayne Gacy stalked the streets of Chicago and suburbs and kidnapped at gunpoint or manipulated young men and boys to come to this Summerdale house. Some on the pretext at some on the pretext of a job. According to the state, once they were tricked into handcuffs, forced to have sex, beaten and tortured, then all killed by ligature, strangulation, and buried under the house or in the crawl space. Two others found on the property, and four additional were found in the Plains River. According to the state, John Wayne Gacy went back to running his construction business during the same years, working 7 days a week, 12 to 14-hour days. Did you want to say something?
Wow. Was it oh, I was just gonna say, wasn't he and his victims either high or drunk during the
Oh
killings?
yeah,
I
he's
forgot.
debauchery. Yeah, he's a drank, smoked, all that. He was partying. He was partying with
Didn't
these
he
kids.
give them drugs too, though?
Yes,
Right?
he would get them
Yeah,
high, inebriated, and that's how he would do
that's right.
what he did. The state
Yeah.
wants you to believe. So he goes on. The state wants you to believe this fantasy theory based on their scenario, and that the motive was for sex, and that they were killed so they could not tell anyone or blackmail me, and that I confessed to the whole crime. So
Oh
up
Lord.
until his dying day, he denied it. His last
He
words.
never
No,
confessed.
no. So that's why I kind
Yeah,
of.
the cops were just after him, and someone put these bodies in his crawl space without his knowledge. Oh no, two of the young men were trying to blackmail him. That's right, he said.
the sheer arrogance and lack of remorse in his interviews is just
Oh man.
raised into a devout Catholic family. Went to private Christian school at age 18. He thought about becoming a priest.
Oh yeah, because they like little boys.
Yes, they do.
Oh Jesus.
That's all I have on him because I think he's very clear. It's very clear what was going on
But
with
you
him.
know, Bundy was trying to come at it the same way. I didn't do this, but I'm
Right.
going to help you find this dude who did it. And then he finally did confess before he was executed.
Yeah, I don't think Gacy came to grips with his mortality, and I don't know why, because he didn't care. And that's a very big trait.
Wow.
Majority of them have that. They don't have that, empathy. They don't
So
care.
we're seeing again now. I wonder. Well, he had epilepsy, so he had an issue with his brain. Maybe it wasn't a mental illness, but he still had a brain that wasn't firing correctly.
Hmm.
So we're
Yeah.
seeing an issue with the brain again. Wow.
I would say so. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. A big blow to the head. His dad. He had a. Well, I think Ramirez had the epilepsy. He had the brain clots.
Oh, I thought you said Gacy was hit by a swing. That was
No, he
Ramirez.
was, but epilepsy was Ramirez.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. He suffered a blow to his head by abusive father. So if I'm trying to take it in, he's abused as a child by his father. He
Yeah.
takes away his masculinity, and if you already have a kind of maybe he had this evil intent in his heart from a very very young age because it's
Mm.
their prepubescent age is the most interesting because it's
Yeah.
through Dahmer, through Bundy, through all of them. They have this really weird displace. It's that fork in the road that they all claim to have when they were in their teenage years. Oh, I could have went this way, could have went that way. Dahmer talks about
Right.
it. That's
It's
what
a
I kind of thing.
choice.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people have been abused by their parents. Even
Hmm.
worse than this, they didn't grow up to kill people. So we're not going to say, well, yeah, it's all because they were abused. I think that impacted them. And I think there's a combination of these things, you know. And I find it interesting that a lot of them did have some kind of spiritual interest in God, but they never took it to the next level of how do I really get into this God thing? How do I really surrender my life to God? Or maybe they just didn't want to.
Very shallow, superficial understanding of anything religious.
Yeah.
I don't think they're and that's another question because I think what I'm going through right now. I don't know if you've ever heard this argument. James White was debating William Lane Craig. They're probably two of my favorite scholars I like to listen to, and that the argue is Calvinism and Molinism. I don't know if you've ever heard of what Molinism is.
What
It's
is that?
basically Calvinism is a predestination where they take from Ephesians 1. God has established, set us apart since the beginning of the world. It was an interpretation of Calvin. So basically, we're discussing God's sovereignty, and I think maybe I'm just trying to apply it to this video. We're not saying God is the author of evil.
He's
But
not the author of evil.
Obviously, but we're saying in a God has given these individuals over, or is God seeking to bring good out of something that is bad and wicked in the world? Like say the Assyrians came and took. He didn't create the Assyrians to be wicked and take the Israelites captive. Instead, he knew that they would do evil and he would bring good out of it. Is that something we can apply to people like serial killers? How would you look at that from a God sovereign level? Because that's an interesting question, I think.
That is a good question, but I don't think everything can be put into a theological box sometimes. And I think as believers, we want to. We got to make this thing come into a box that's wrapped up tidy and explains everything. All I know is God is good and Satan is evil.
Right.
So God does good things, the enemy does bad things.
Yeah, I just
You
didn't
know?
know if you understood the argument between both sides. 'Cause I'm still learning. I'm still trying to define Calvinism correctly and Molinism correctly.
To me it's that argument of everything's God's will. Whatever happens, that must have been God's will. I don't agree with that. You mean to
Right.
tell me God wanted Richard Ramirez to rape an 8-year-old. That was just part of God's will. No, it was
Right, right.
not.
No, actually, I don't believe in that. And if I'm understanding correctly, maybe that's what the. I don't want to attack Calvinism because I'm not truly identifying, but that was the argument that
Yeah.
that's what Calvinism's declaring. It's a
I
predestined.
don't
Yeah.
I don't agree with that, okay? And this is why I refuse to have my beliefs put in a box. I don't
Right.
follow any particular theology or line of thought.
Hmm.
I'm a Bible believing, blood bought, spirit filled Christian woman.
But I think
You
the
know?
argument can be used with Judas Iscariot. What do you think?
Well, that goes back to in Romans when Paul is discussing Pharaoh. Because we know in the Old Testament, the Bible says that Moses was constantly coming to Pharaoh. You need to let my people go, says the
Yeah.
Lord,
Hmm.
and all everything that went down.
Hmm.
And then Paul, because it kept saying that, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. So people would think that's not right. That's not fair. Pharaoh didn't have a chance. But if you look at Romans, Paul says, listen, speaking of Pharaoh, he's like, how about this? How about God suffered a long time with these evil people and then he did use them for a
Yeah.
purpose?
Yeah. That's exactly where I'm standing. Um,
But Pharaoh is much different to me than someone like Ted Bundy. I don't believe God used something Ted Bundy
I don't think
did
it. Yeah. I don't think
to
he
have
used.
a bigger
Mhm.
purpose.
Yeah.
No,
Hmm.
absolutely not.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's really looking at that. It's just me.
No, people do
Because
say stuff like that. Oh, you
mhm.
suffered this evil thing, but God was teaching you something.
I guess the question.
God was,
I guess the question
strengthening you.
is. I guess the question is if what good can we get out of studying individuals with behaviors that are incomprehensible to the secular world? If we're claiming that we have a godly knowledge, should we not have a more deeper understanding of God's sovereignty than the psychiatrist and the psychologist? Or because I'm not trying to connect the serial killings with God has a purpose, but
Right.
since they can't shed certain things on it, are we called as Christians to possibly give hope for the families of these individuals or of the victims? What hope from the Christian perspective can we answer better than someone who's just diagnosing these mentally ill people? Do you see what I'm saying? What kind of
Yeah.
that's why
Well,
it's a
the
touchy
only
subject.
hope that I think we could give them is, hopefully their family members did know the Lord and they are in a better place. And this world is only a temporary home, that our home in eternity lasts forever.
Hmm.
And plus, the Bible does say that God does heal the broken heart. So, supernaturally, I believe God has the power to actually heal these wounds. I don't think this is
Yes.
something the family will ever forget.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I do not want to make light of this. This is horrendous, and I couldn't
Yeah.
even imagine being a family member. So, my hope for them is to allow God to love on them and to heal their heart and to help them to retain those good memories of their loved ones.
Yeah. It just makes me think of Proverbs 28. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as lions. Due to, I guess that's our cue, but due to the
Yeah.
wrongdoing of the land, its leaders are many, but by a person of understanding and knowledge, so it endures. A poor man who oppresses the helpless is like a driving rain which leaves no food. Those who
Mm-hmm.
abandon the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive against them. Evil people do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand everything. Um, I guess we'll leave that with with our I guess our final thought. Time's coming up. It's been a long one, but
Mm-hmm.
seeking God is I basically the only thing if we're gonna have some kind of intent for this video. I think seeking God, if anybody's looking for and they're having trouble, especially the families,
Yeah.
they're having trouble trying to grasp with this. God will always give you rest and peace, and
Yeah.
even though
And
we
I-
can't
and I'm
explain it,
I'm sure the question is, why did God allow this? And I
hmm
think that's a very
I'm sure that's what they're
legitimate
asking.
question.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I would say to this that God does give us free will, and unfortunately, some people take that free will and do very evil things.
Yes.
And God has done everything to stop these kinds of things by bringing his son to die on the cross
Amen.
that we can have a new life. And if Richard Ramirez and Eileen and Ted and Jeffrey and Gacy had repented to the Lord
Hmm.
and dealt with all this evil in their hearts, they could have been transformed, and all this stuff could
Yeah.
have been, you know, not coming to pass.
Yeah.
So,
It's it's an interesting topic. Um, I
and I
wonder.
would like to say one more thing to help the families.
Yeah.
I am 100% for capital punishment for these kinds of
Oh,
issues.
absolutely.
Now, Ted Bundy's mother said it was wrong to take Ted's life, but what about all the lives that Ted took?
Yeah.
And I would also like to say that it was God himself that came up with capital punishment in the first place.
Amen. Amen.
So these believers that say it's wrong, we can't kill, capital punishment is much different than murdering. It's a punishment for something very evil, and yes, I do support it. And if people think that makes me less of a Christian, I don't care, because there are wicked people. The Bible talks about the wicked that we must be protected from.
Majority of Christians would back up the death penalty because it's institutionalized. Our judicial system is institutionalized from God's word itself. Mankind did not come up with the judicial system because we're not that morally upright.
Right.
So, great video. God is the answer. It's just, we as Christians, we understand why the world is wicked the way it is. When you come into a relationship with God, you realize the sin in your own heart, and you just look at the world around you and say, yeah, it makes more sense than for me to diagnose and get all these diagnoses, and all that is good because we can get medical help, but
Yeah.
ultimately the heart is the problem of mankind. So
The heart. Yeah.
therapists will not tell you this, psychologists won't tell you this. I think that's why we made this video, because you don't get that insight from a lot of
And
people.
if anyone's struggling with hate in their heart, I've been there too. I hated my dad for a long time. Jesus said, if you hate your brother in your heart, you're basically guilty of murder. So we can't if we were abused, yes, get help with that. We're not going to make light of it, saying just get over it. That can damage you down to your very core. So if anyone's struggling with hatred in the heart, ask God to help you, to deal with those things. And yes, eventually he will help you forgive that person, because when we start saying you just got to forgive people, you've got these people that have been through horrendous things. We have to tell them God can help you work through that grieving process of forgiveness. I am not going to be on here going, lady, you need to forgive your husband for beating the crap out of you because God says you should. No, you need to get the heck away from him and let God heal you. That's what you need to do, and protect your children.
Absolutely. I'm going to call our viewers to action, though. I do want you guys to subscribe, hit the like button, leave comments. We're going to be having some new topics coming up. We are going to be going against some false teachings. We do, and I think a fan of ours, subscriber of ours, wants us to get more into a verse by verse study of the Bible itself, because we're getting a lot of those questions. Hey, how do I read John? How do I go about reading the Bible? I want to learn how to read the Bible for myself. How do I go about doing that? So, even though there's so much material for us to go over with these false teachers, there's a new guy I found. Probably going to be putting out a new video with this. It's the revision of the Adam and Eve story, which is just. But within that, I'm going to give you the correct way of how to read Genesis 3. But anyway, I think that would be great for people to know a book by book of everything, so we can know the Bible. We can know the Bible all the way through, and I think you can lead that. Having been in the faith for a long time now, I think you can lead that whole study.
Women teaching men? Oh,
well,
boy.
Just don't tell anybody, okay?
I just can't exercise authority over them. That's
well,
right. Okay.
We will blur out the face and put a man's face over yours, but we'll be fine. So.
And I do want to say our next video is going to be tackling Scientology. That's lots of fun.
I think it's going to be funny. I think it's going to be a funny one. It's going to be a light one. So just some radical stuff. So
crazy crap.
Well, God bless, and we'll see you in the next one.
Okay. Bye. We love you guys.
Bye.